Can everybody hear me okay? Way in the back? All right. We all have a good lunch? Excellent. Oh, excellent. So hopefully I'll try to keep this somewhat funny and interesting for you. So let me go back here first. I got to put it in the right mode. There we go. Okay. So I'm here to talk to you today about the emerging product security leader discipline. What we'll do is we'll go over what it is, what do I mean by product security. I'll talk about what is a product security leader, what is it that I do. We're going to talk about how including product security and a product security leader in your development process can turn DevOps into DevSec Ops. And I'll do that by talking through each of the kind of important skills that we bring to the table there. And then I'll give an example of each of how those skills, when applied to turn DevOps into DevSecOps, actually can result in a real-world project. And I'll have samples and examples of projects that could very easily occur or I've actually worked with in the past that will help show how to apply that. So who hasn't heard a security story like this, right? There's some website, maybe it has a vulnerability. There's maybe there's a client component that goes along with that uses it to talk to the web service. There's some finder who finds a problem with that. He comes and, hey, this is really bad and here's why. And he gives it a trendy name and publicizes it. And the next thing you know, it's all over the technology news, and then it gets further described technically in a white paper, and so now it becomes an O-Day, and it gets picked up by the non-technology news, just the normal daily news. And so now you've got the whole spectacle of a really bad problem that's an O-Day that everybody's talking about. And then, of course, somebody takes that, then makes that sample code for everybody, puts it into a tool. Oh, and finally gives the team that made it, or the company that made it, 90 days to fix it. There is a better way out of that, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about that today. It is product security. So what do I mean by product security? Well, it's the combination of product and security. And by product, I mean something that is made to be sold outside the organization. So it could be a product like a software package, or it could be a service that's offered for payment. It contains some level of software, because pretty much everything contains software these days. Outside of the big magnets and the fan blades, everything has bits in it doing something, so it's all software. It also has to talk to other things, on the network, so that it actually is communicating with other stuff, because those software that exists in isolation and doesn't talk to anything is fairly low risk, and so we don't have to worry about it as much. Now, on the other side of that, the security, I'm really getting at trust. That is the things that go into making customers who are going to buy that product feel that it's reliable, that it's trustworthy, if you will, in that they can depend on it to do what they need to do and to fail appropriate where necessary. And the importance of that is easily shown in an example. Trust is hard to gain and easily lost. And when you lose it, it takes a long time to get that trust back. And so, show of hands, how many of you think that Microsoft makes secure products today? That right there is a prime example of the brand damage when you violate trust. They started their Trustworthy Computing initiative 15 years ago. But still today, people think that they're making insecure products. Now, we can argue some other offline about whether that's true or not. But the prime example there is that brand damage. And so when you think about how that might apply to my earlier generic story, you can really get a sense of that, really the security part of what I do is about maintaining and improving that trust with the customers of your product. So I'm going to summarize a product security leader in 2 quotes. The first one is about defense. And I have a fun quote here from the professional volleyball player Brooke Sweat. She says, defenders see things way different than blockers. And this kind of describes a product security leader in that at a high level, it's thinking about more than just blocking the current vulnerability, more than just stopping the current ransomware outbreak that's moving around through a network. A product security leader has to think holistically and layering defenses across the stack to make sure that as that thing is being put together, all of those possible bad outcomes, if as many as can be thought of and planned for, have been taken into account and put in different protections to holistically defend against not just the blocking the problems that we know of today, but hopefully stopping the problems that we have yet to find out about. And so there's another quote that I think summarizes the other half of that. And this is probably the quote that brings up the name of J.D. Salinger's book, The Catcher in the Rye. And in it, the main character, Holden Caulfield, says, "Anyway, I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids, and nobody's around. Well, nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. And what I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go off that cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, and I have to come out of somewhere and catch them. And that's all I do all day. I just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but it's the only thing I'd really like to be." And so the product security leader is basically, the other half of it is being this catcher in the rye, if you will. Trying to stop those bad things from happening because we can see them coming. We are the adult in the room when it comes to security. And making sure that we're helping teams not go off the edge of that cliff, that metaphorical cliff. And it also it encompasses the passion that you often find in people who are in the product security leader role. We're industry veterans typically. We're usually not noobs, so we've been around the security space for a long time. We've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, etc. We know how to really bring that all together into that holistic worldview, and have a passion for doing it to make sure it gets done. Now, think about those two quotes as kind of a high-level overview. And you can translate that down into the kinds of things that a product security leader does or does not do. On the does side, we are the subject matter expert in security. We often are teachers for the development teams we engage with. They need to understand and learn how to be better at writing secure code, so we teach them how to do that. We get to be their cheerleaders and root them on and say, "Hey, awesome, good job, you're doing all this cool security work. Let's see about taking it to the next level." And that's where the influencer comes in. We have to, show them how the security work that they've already done will help them in other ways, and that they can take it a step further and just with a little more effort in this one area. Right? And sometimes we have to be the policeman. We have to be the adult in the room or on the edge of that cliff, stopping bad stuff from happening and say, "Look, we really can't do it this way. That is really risky. So we've got to do something different." And there's some things we also don't do, like enterprise architecture. And it's not that we don't know about enterprise architecture. A product security leader is usually has done some level of enterprise architecture in the past. But we need to make sure that the teams understand that they are responsible for their own successful security outcomes. And so we don't design the whole thing for them. We may help them with the security aspects of the design. And I'll get more into that later when we talk about skills. But the teams still need to take care of that. And because we look at security holistically, we're not the ones who are sitting there checking off compliance directives and making sure the technical compliance stuff gets done. We don't usually develop code, although a typical product security leader has a development background. But we're not usually writing the security parts for them. We usually don't work with a single team. Right now, I have a half a dozen different development teams and different projects, different products that I work with, that I'm engaging with on a regular basis, helping to kind of juggle what they're doing, tossing them up in the air, if you will, for the appropriate amount of time until they need to come back down and get helped out for that next level. We find that we don't usually accept the risk either. We make sure that the risks are well documented and well understood, and that it translates into an actual business definition, a business outcome, and then we make sure that the appropriate level of the organization accepts that risk on behalf of the company, on behalf of the customer. Since we're focused on customer, it's usually about accepting that risk on behalf of the customer to make sure that it's clear what could happen, and that way we make sure it's informed consent. So that's the product security leader role as quickly as I could summarize it. But let's talk a little bit about DevOps and taking that to DevSecOps. Well, there was an image that went around the Twitterverse recently that talked about Agile and CI/CD and DevOps. Some of you may recognize some of the letter or the words here. But DevOps, is about roles. It's about building a culture, and that drives responsiveness in the overall development culture. Whereas in DevSecOps, we're taking that and extending it to improve trust. So imagine there's security in every layer and every step. So thinking about how you check, and recheck security along the way. It optimizes for having something over nothing. Because it's always better to get started on that security work as soon as possible. And if it's not perfect, okay, that's great. DevOps is about responsiveness, so we can always tweak the security outcomes there. We can always make the tool smarter or better. It's about always making sure that the secure outcomes are delivered, so it's a consistent part of the overall DevOps process. And that means that we're security ready always, right? The DevSecOps culture is about making sure that security is always there, always on, always available. Now, in order to make all that happen, we have to have a set of skills. So, including a product security leader in the development process, they don't have money, but what they do have is a very particular set of skills. Skills acquired over a very long career. Skills that make finding a vulnerability a nightmare for attackers. So, I'm going to go over those skills, and first and foremost, since we're talking about product and it's all software development. So this is, putting together code to make it do something. So, you're thinking about what to do and throwing some code together, and maybe you test it, send it off to the production environment, you can test it there. And then, ignoring any bug reports or problems that come back. But seriously, it's making those bits. It's creating the bits that tell the computers what to do. And to help you, for those of you who may want to consider a career in product security leader, as a product security leader, here's how a product security leader gets that software development experience. She may have written or tested some code. It doesn't matter if that code is commercial or freemium or open source or a pet project. It doesn't matter. It's that experience of putting together a program through at least one development cycle. So making sure that you've seen it from start of idea all the way through delivery to the end customer, and that customer may actually be a paying customer, but at least it's whoever gets to use the software. It also is important to have shipped a feature, even if that feature is just a little widget you put together. And it also helps to understand, software development helps you understand that shipping is a feature. So, getting the thing done is critically important. And that helps a product security leader understand how to temper that risk conversation to make sure that it's not overreactive. So how do we bring that in? What can that help with? Well, software is putting the dev in DevOps and the dev in DevSecOps. We're really talking about familiarity with a variety of programming languages. As I like to say, every programming language has a for loop. And if you've experienced several of them, then you can learn pretty quickly how to grab onto the important structures in a programming language and understand that cool new Ruby or Java or whatever it is widget that they're using these days. It might even help you with the old stuff like COBOL. Having that knowledge, that software development experience, helps a product security leader build rapport with the dev teams. So understanding how those different roles play, how you combine that with architecture. And it helps them understand that you have to consider both the security of features and the security features that go into that product that's getting put together. So what does that help in terms of outcomes? Well, here are some examples that we can pull straight out of that combination, right? It could be that the team puts together some custom glue to make single sign-on work with that web application. It could be they created some sort of risk analysis dashboard for that web service that's getting built. Maybe they utilized security hardened libraries as opposed to just the regular normal use versions of them. Or maybe it's some sort of feature enhancement to add two-factor authentication to that single sign-on web service they just put together. Now, it helps for those projects to drive awareness and understanding, but the next skill really is about being able to spot the risk and spot the problem as it comes out. So when you think about risk knack, it's not an easily defined quantity. It's kind of an intangible, but it relates to how a product security leader understands and internalizes risks, whether it be, hey, we need to have the appropriate response plan, or I need to be concerned about locking this thing up, right? It's putting all those different possibilities together. And that really helps bring together all of those other security experiences and skills. And it's the ability to say, that's risky, and here's why. I think we have a better way to do that like this, so it prevents these potential problems with that new privacy regulation that's coming out in May. And that really helps to synthesize the risk discussion with the development team, right? It's that ability to put it in the right terms and show how there is a better way that also helps with some other directive or concern that may be hitting that particular team. So how does somebody get the risk knack? Well, it helps to be naturally paranoid. It helps to be inquisitive, maybe a natural skeptic. It helps to have researched multiple viewpoints on issues or about technology questions. And that helps correct for risk biases. Because when you're thinking about risk, you need to think about the whole picture from multiple angles, from multiple sides, and be able to say, hey, wait, I'm naturally gravitating towards that technology, so I need to make sure I'm expanding and thinking about it more holistically. And ultimately, it boils down to being able to say, what could possibly go wrong with this? And come up with those answers with tools and with other mechanisms, but be able to answer that question in a variety of different ways. So how can we leverage that risk knack in the DevSecOps world? Well, that subject matter expertise will help show the good, the bad, and the ugly. Maybe there's good risks, like you're shipping with a feature turned off because it wasn't fully baked security-wise. Maybe it's a really bad risk because that feature went out the door, turned on anyway. Or maybe it's super ugly because you've already got a pending O-Day against that feature that never had the security thing that was turned on when it shouldn't have been. It also helps promote that secure development culture because it provides realistic ways for the product security leader to convey that understanding to the devs. It can often help and make things simpler overall because, if you're doing it right, the more secure way should be a simpler way as well. And it helps get ahead of the proactive privacy and security features that might be necessary for that new web service, that new application that's coming out. And by designing some of that risk knack in, it can actually be preemptively planning for some of those things. So what can we see as some possible outcomes with it? Well, we have preemptively engineering privacy features. So maybe who's heard of GDPR, right? Obviously, pretty much, yeah, everybody. Okay, great. Well, there's this thing in there called the right to be forgotten, right? So it could help you in having a feature in the product that helps automatically delete or at least hide or do whatever it needs to do to execute on the right to be forgotten for a given person who requests it, right? Having those things built in could be an outcome of understanding that risk knack and applying it. Maybe it's making sure that both the client and the server components incorporate aspects of security, like not necessarily blindly trusting one another. It could be an outcome like changing a feature to have more secure defaults, so that feature that didn't have the right security stuff is turned off. And also it helps educate the development team on more secure design patterns. Maybe they've been doing it this one way for forever, but there's a better way that's simpler, that's actually easier to do the security with. And if we just change it this one way, now we've actually achieved multiple outcomes. It's a win-win for everybody. Okay. So by taking that features and working with the development team, we can pull those secure design patterns out. And one of the ways we can start to identify those secure design patterns is with the next skill, threat modeling. How many of you have heard of threat modeling? Great. When I asked that question years ago, like about a decade or so ago, very few hands would have come up. So this is awesome. Anyway, so it's the ability to decompose an application, determine what threats might be applying to it, think about designing all those mitigations, putting them together, and then helping the development team implement them in some shape or fashion. And to fully understand those risks, a product security leader needs to be familiar with this process, this mechanism to help build and plan for all those mitigations, and then be able to use those other skills to be able to influence the team to actually make sure they implement them appropriately. So for those who are not familiar with the overall process and want to learn how to do it, this is typically what a product security leader has done in the past to actually get that skill in threat modeling. Might have been taking training, reading a good book, and I will admit my bias, I know them, but I know someone who wrote it, but I have a great book to suggest. Talk to me after. It could be experimenting with the tools. There are many free tools out there that help deal with how to understand how to do threat modeling and then make it more efficient. Maybe it was taking that favorite process, even it could be a physical process, and modeling it in a threat modeling tool and saying, hey, what if I just analyze this particular thing that I like to do or this particular program I like to use and figure out what might be its risks, and then say, hey, how might I be able to actually fix that? And then a great way to solidify that knowledge, and that most product security leaders have done, usually with their development teams, is to train others in exactly how to do that. So once you've already mastered the basic knowledge, start to take that and help others understand it as well. So when we bring that into the DevSecOps world, threat modeling will help decompose the project into its subcomponents. That helps figure out where to separate areas of concern, because sometimes we might mush too many things together. It helps define where the known trust boundaries are. Where do we say that this is the security border? And if we have a flaw in that, then we're going to make sure we fix it right away. It helps clarify span of control. Who owns which component? Is it internal, this team makes it, or is it considered external because it's some other team that makes it and we have no control over what they do? It also helps demonstrate directly and obviously that simplicity is lower risk. And here's a great example from that specific point. If you take a threat model that you've mapped out and you say, well, we want to put this security technology right here. We want to add that insert technology here, like a web app firewall or something. Immediately you can see there are half a dozen or more different risks that just got applied because you've complicated the model. You've made it more risky, more challenging, more pieces to fail than it did before. Now, some realistic outcomes. These are something that's very helpful for people to have. Maybe it reinforces that development security training. As I like to say, it awakens the sleepers. It helps identify who in the organization already has those security inklings, those security smarts, and really lets them shine in helping with the threat modeling as well as rekindle that interest. It might be an outcome like the operations team has monitors specific to unmitigated threats. So after that analysis is done, we know we haven't fixed this one. Okay, great. We can set up monitors specifically for that problem. Maybe the development team learns to spot and mitigate those threats ahead of time, right? That's always a perfect outcome. We'd love if we had more of that. Would help a lot of problems in the industry. But, it could be that as they're reinforcing that training, they're getting better at preemptively designing those mitigations in. And it could be something like, say you have an overall release cycle that goes with the overall DevOps release train, and maybe threat model review becomes a standard part of that process. Could be something like maybe for the whole release, or at least even every sprint, there's at least a checkpoint to say, did the threat model change? If so, make sure we mark that and correct for it. If not, well, hey, we checked, it didn't change at all. So that will then move us into the next layer, if you will, of skills, IT security operations, or as I like to say, run cloud safe. Okay, bad icon jokes aside, this is the idea that you've worked in operations, you have some inkling of how security works in operations, and that how that might be applied, how that adds layers to make up for those unmitigatable threats or the unmitigated threats. These are, not all problems can be solved at design time or at build time, and so having this background again helps a product security leader bring all those things together. So, how does somebody typically get IT security operations experience? Well, one of the things is being at a conference like we're at today. That helps. Usually it's working in a CISO's organization or some other security risk management function in a company. Maybe that person was hands-on keyboard in configuring a system for least privilege, investigating security incidents, or incidents related to change management violations. Maybe it was even something on the business side and analyzing a cost-benefit analysis of some sort of intrusion prevention or detection system. All those things kind of give that first level of IT security operations experience that product security leaders tend to have. And if we think about how that comes in and benefits DevOps, taking it to DevSecOps, well, we're thinking about operational defense in depth. It could be the cloud, it could be the enterprise, or it could be some combination thereof. It's about prioritizing those risks. So knowing that some risks are greater than others and how to put those together in a realistic fashion. Knowing which ones to chase after and which ones to let slide till later. It also benefits and takes it to DevSecOps by bringing all of those different things together, from product security features to the needs of the security operations staff to the needs for actual customer operations. Those features, those secure features, the operations security features, all coming together into one spot. And so here's a couple real-world examples that we can pull out of that world. Right? It could be that the security operations team has all the logging signal they need to analyze. Who has all the logging data that they need? Like right now, you can say, I got all the logging. Oh, okay, all right. Well, sorry. All right. So there's also the operations team can make sure that those security is available at the appropriate layers. The development team has a backlog of security features. Give it all that knowledge, that understanding, we can put all that into the backlog, and now actually security becomes measurable as a part of the development process. It could be something really cool, like a risk management dashboard that gives real-time detail about up-to-date risks that are unmitigated and currently being attacked in the environment. I know, pipe dream, but I've seen it done. Okay, so one of the other ways, and an additional skill that product security leaders have, is learning from someone else's success or failure. And as the former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt said, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself. So how do you learn from somebody else's epic fail? Well, you can do stuff like study classic defensive patterns. And a great example there is in chess, where there's these sets of moves that have a name, and they're known as being the typical response to a set of moves that an opponent may bring on you. Well, you can look at the same kind of a thing, for example, in the security space, right? Knowing that, hey, if we just all use parameterized queries that are stored in access-controlled stored procedures that only access on access-controlled views, our database SQL injection problems don't go away entirely, but just got dramatically lessened, right? That's a classic defensive pattern. It could be analyzing what worked. So looking at the problems that have been thwarted in the past, analyzing that new security feature that's in some sort of product, and saying, hey, this is what that's working today. And also looking at what didn't. Look at where those failures occurred. Do like a root cause analysis of that next vulnerability that comes out. And say, wow, so that's what they screwed up. A great example there might be a Heartbleed, right? Where's the screw up in Heartbleed? How could they not have screwed that up in the first place? What could I do in my DevOps culture to make sure we don't screw that up in the first place? It could also be something like devising ways or learning from devising ways to prevent those. Okay, I already went over that. All right, so how do we, some real world examples of actually learning from failure? Well, it could be about not having enough signal, right? I mean, the average time to discover a breach is like, 12 months or something like that? I mean, it's way out there. So we can say, hey, they didn't have enough signal to be able to tell they got breached. It could be not considering someone else's insider threats. Who heard about the recent Facebook thing where they had an engineer who was stalking? Not cool. They didn't have the insider threat thought of there. It could be looking at the lack of process or not having a process to deal with those vulnerability reports. I mean, we've seen that as well, where something reports a problem and it doesn't get to the right people, and the company misses the boat there. It could be also something like learning that they failed because they ignored their routine maintenance. And I'm sure you can pull up a bunch of examples there if you like with a web search. I can think of a few. It's also ways to learn from successes. So like I was giving that earlier description of using parameterized queries, leveraging a platform in the development environment that has a bunch of compiler security enhancements to make code more robust and resilient to attack. Maybe it's a minimal network footprint, making sure the attack surface is reduced. Or you might even try to go some advanced level and think about a bug bounty for finders, right? And having some sort of challenge where you engage with the community greater. And that kind of gets us into our next skill, which is some level of experience with penetration testing. So understanding how to take reconnaissance and scanning, and then the next level gaining access, and then maintaining access all the way up through possible covering of tracks. And having some familiarity with that. Because penetration testing helps a product security leader think like an attacker. Decompose the software, not unlike what we do with threat modeling. Learn how to think about how to break into it. Think about how to break it in other ways, and then take that to the step after to fix it, and then with that software development experience, put that into the right detail or context. So how does one get this kind of experience? Well, again, training, conferences, other custom training for it. First-hand experimentation with tools. Most of the folks I work with have a familiarity that's very personal. They've just said, hey, I'm going to go learn how to use Kali, or insert tool here, right? And they go and experiment with it and figure out how it works and what they can benefit from it. Maybe it's testing with one of those deliberately bad web applications like WebGoat. Could be going to and getting some sort of certification with some of those tools, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Or it could be working with some sort of vulnerability management program, not unlike some of the offerings that are out there in the vendor floor. So, how do we apply that in the DevSecOps world? Well, we can break and then fix all of the things. In the DevOps world and in the DevSecOps world, fix all of the easy things. Okay, I'll speed up. Thank you. We've got a lot of challenges here where we're wasting time not arguing over whether we have to fix something that should have been fixed a long time ago. Don't fix the same things twice, which kind of goes back to that whole DevOps automation world. Make sure we're defending all of the unfixed things. So where we haven't fixed them, we know where they are. We're going to go and do our best to defend them and watch that. And you'd see that in real-world examples like easy security configuration work is all done. And that means that they've also got security unit tests that automatically check to make sure that easy security work is done. There's some sort of regression test for all the features. So if there's a security problem in a feature, they have a test that checks for it and will tell you when it suddenly gets broken again. It also helps for pushing anti-fragile designs across with a big multiple-layer cross-covering design. So that actually helps them, think about and will give an outcome of planning to block chains of failure that would lead to future compromise. How many of you noticed I said blockchain? Blockchain? Yeah, okay. Which is the next skill, crypto. And by crypto, I don't mean Bitcoin. As a professional, I'm angered that crypto got reassociated with Bitcoin. But no, I'm talking about your classic cryptography, understanding those things that we use in the security space to keep information private and protected at rest and in transit. And how do you learn that? Well, it's really fairly straightforward for the basics. Understanding how the TLS handshake works, understanding the difference between different key types like public and private, understanding where to use hashes and what kinds of salts to put in them with initialization vectors, how big to make all of those keys and hashes and salts and things, understanding how that then applies into cert chains with root certificates and permissions and intermediate certificate authorities and all that, and then understanding a couple of key axioms of cryptography, which is don't roll your own and don't be a CA. So think about how do we apply that? Well, we analyze what threats the crypto does not prevent and make sure that we're accounting for them. We know what to use when and where. That applies then in making sure that the key management features are in there for operations and even for customers sometimes. Making sure that the crypto is all agile and modern so that the right sizes and algorithms are used and there's a plan to renew and replace them over time. And using HTTPS everywhere. So some real-world examples that would then apply would be key management features for both operations and customers. Maybe it's making sure there's no secrets embedded in the code, so there's some sort of check that automatically goes through the source code to look for those. Or maybe it's even having some cool feature like break the glass kind of a thing that uses crypto to be tamper evident that somebody decided to go in and access a server directly for some legitimate tracked reason. That would help, in a variety of different ways. So the next thing is certifications, and I know there's a lot of dispute as to whether certifications are required or should be used. I think they help, and this is why you often see a lot of product security leaders have them. And so there's some example certifications here. I'm sure many of you in the room have one or more of those. I myself have CISSP, and I must admit I'm a slacker. I don't have CSSLP yet, although it is the certification that pretty much defines half of my job. So what does it take? Well, I don't need to go over this in too much detail, but there's a focus study in security. There's usually some sort of work experience that's required. It might be a subtopic specialization with some of those certifications. Some of them even require to pass a hands-on test. And that's a useful thing, because now you know that that person can actually not only understand the knowledge, but can actually work with it and execute on it. And when you bring that into the DevSecOps world, well, it gives a product security leader who has a breadth of knowledge in the space, can really apply it well across. And those specializations could be used in very specific areas. Maybe have somebody who's got a security operations certification of some type, and so that person can really help to focus on how do we mitigate those unfixed threats, right? It could be something like make sure that it covers customers' legal or just practical expectations. Customers often say, hey, how many of your people are certified or trained or whatever, and that certifications help add to that. And that leads to real-world outcomes. Things like fewer security audit findings, if you look version over version of a product or service. Maybe it's making sure they report to customers on the level of staff training. Maybe it's on the trust portal that describes all that. So any customer, any potential customer can look that up right away. Make sure that the security operations features and the staff are structured for that responsiveness that DevOps requires. And it makes sure that they usually have a continuing ed requirement. So your security knowledge in the team stays up to date, stays modernized. And speaking of modernized, I'm going to start talking about a couple of skills that are more recently starting to show up in product security leaders. One of those is Agile and continuous delivery. So in that image I mentioned on the Twitterverse that covered Agile and CI/CD, this is the other part of that. And really it's about this feedback loop, right? This figure 8 that goes from design through coding, through testing, through deploying, through operating, and back in on itself again. Around and around and around. And this image here has some examples of the different kinds of things that might go happen on each of those stages. And really, when you think about, well, what does that bring together? You have the Agile area that focuses on processes and change and optimizing for delivery. And you have the CI/CD world that looks at that whole life cycle, making sure we have automation tools that put it all together. Okay. So I have some details for some of the counterparts there. If you'd like to hear, talk to me after. But think about, well, that provides DevSecOps deployment agility, right? So the security gates are automated using tools, or maybe it's an incremental security improvement culture. The security team follows its own guidance, right? I mean, it's really about putting security into that test-driven development world. And if you think about what are some real-world examples, it could be web application scanners in the build pipeline, or scanning all code for security vulnerabilities, or looking at whether that new container that somebody downloaded has vulnerable libraries sitting in it. It all helps, bring all that together, which helps because Internet of Things. Why? I don't know. Because IoT. This is really hot right now. Everything, like half of one of the recent security conferences I went to was all about IoT, how to manage it, how to use it. But there's a lot to be learned from that Internet of Things world. Things such as it's all software. As I mentioned at the beginning, when you factor out the magnets and the actuators and all that, it's all about bits and software. It helps to learn to identify all of the things securely, hopefully connect all the things. Working in a resource-constrained computing environment, which often IoT is a very resource-constrained world. And then hopefully a product security leader learns to catch up for those sins of the past from learning about IoT. So how do we bring DevSecOps into that world? Well, fight tech debt before it's too late. Understanding that authentication and authorization need to occur everywhere. I mean, everywhere. No silent failures. So everything needs to generate signal, especially when something bad happens. Bringing that life cycle of hardware and software together, defining how long your hardware will live and how long your software will live, and making sure that they at least line up reasonably well. And most importantly, they can't trust the clients. So I tried to think of some examples that we could put together about secure IoT, and I just couldn't come up with anything. I'm just kidding. Here's a few. So think about something like security relevant signal from those devices, making sure they're all providing detail about what happened, what went bad. Maybe it's an automated correlation analysis engine that takes the cloud logs and the device logs and squishes them together and says, hey, this doesn't match. Make sure things like the cloud authenticates devices robustly. Maybe it's making sure you have a remotely upgradable software stack in your client systems, in your devices. And it's, making sure that the devices distrust the cloud as much as the cloud should distrust them. So, there's some real-world examples. So, in summary, we talked about what a product security leader is, what product security is, how DevOps is different and extends into DevSecOps. I went over all those important skills, and I also gave you real-world examples of how someone would get those skills and how they might be used. You can use that if you want to study. And then that really makes it practical. So as we're wrapping up here, my suggestion to you and how you might be able to apply this. Well, if you're interested in becoming one, by all means, talk to me after. We're hiring. But also, feel free to leverage the experience in those skills. But it's really, in the next 3 weeks, say you're a dev on a project, reach out to the product security leader in your organization. They might not go by the same name. They might be called a variety of different things. But find that person out, reach out to them and take them out to coffee. Start talking about, hey, how could we take some of those security improvement ideas and apply them in our world? Either ones we thought of ourselves or maybe one of the examples that I already have in my deck here. And then finally, in 6 months, I want you to take one of those things that you talked to the product security leader about and implement it in your product. That's my challenge to you. Start building your DevSecOps culture today. Thank you. We got time? Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Don't think I have time for questions, do I? Okay, all right. I'll get out of the way. I'll be in the back over there. We can talk.